Okay, happy Tuesday, seniors. Today I'm just going to do a quick overview of Act 3 of Othello. So there's 4 scenes in Act 3, but scenes 1 and 2 are super short. So it's a pretty brief act overall. Scene 3 is pretty long, but pretty brief act overall. Only a couple of things happen. For the most part, it's just dialogue and conversation. So I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as possible, just so that you have a quick rundown of Act 3. Hopefully you finished reading by now, or you've watched some of the other review videos, or you've read the No Fear Shakespeare translation, and you have a pretty good grasp of what's going on. But basically in scenes 1 and 2, we find out that Desdemona has agreed to help Cassio get back on Othello's good side. So her and Cassio have kind of teamed up, they've become friends, and Desdemona really wants to help Cassio get back onto Othello's good side. Remember, he is kind of out of Othello's good graces because of the fight with Montano and all the violence that happened there and how Montano got hurt, and he's very well respected in Cyprus, so Othello didn't want to keep Cassio as his lieutenant, and Desdemona is just trying to help him get back on Othello's good graces, essentially. Then in scene 2, we see Othello talking to Iago. They kind of have an interaction. And then scene 3, everybody comes together. They're all in the same place. And they have like a little bit of a conversation, and then everyone leaves. Emilia, Desdemona, and Cassio all have places to go. And Iago decides that it's a good time to start planting some seeds of doubt and jealousy in Othello's mind. So after this brief little conversation where Iago and Othello meet up with Desdemona, Emilia, and Cassio, Iago asks Othello if he has noticed the way that Cassio and Desdemona look at each other, if he's noticed anything going on there. And Othello's like, no, why? I don't really know why you're saying this. And Iago is very, very coy in this moment. He's like, oh, it's nothing. It's probably nothing. I shouldn't betray my friend. I don't want to upset you. It's probably just based on, silly ideas in my head, da-da-da. So Iago's playing it really coy, really trying to pretend that he doesn't know much of anything, that he's just observing this as a bystander, that he's completely outside of this as a third party, innocent onlooker. And Othello kind of eggs him on. He's like, no, what are you talking about? Like, I want to know what you mean between my wife and Cassio. What kind of interaction are you seeing there? And Iago kind of goes on to suggest that Desdemona is maybe possibly having an affair. There's been some rumors. He's seen some looks. He is just wondering if Othello is suspicious at all of that. And Othello says no, and Iago goes on to say, Desdemona, she's going to go back to her own kind, where we see this race issue come up again between Desdemona and Othello, and Iago is kind of using that as a point of contention between them. He's saying she's going to go back to her own kind. She's going to lose interest in you really quickly. It's only natural for her to be attracted to someone of her own kind. He uses that phrasing. And that's what Cassio is. He's someone her father would approve of. She lied to her father about marrying you. What makes you think that she won't lie to you about something going on with Cassio? Like, she's always had kind of a bad reputation with men. Iago is just kind of spitting forward all of this information, some of it true, some of it false, to kind of get Othello to start doubting his relationship with Desdemona. And then as that interaction kind of draws to a close, Desdemona comes back into the room. And she sees that Othello is kind of flustered. She's worried about him. He says he just has a headache. She takes out this handkerchief, and this is one of the most important things in the entire play. It's one of the most important items. It symbolizes a lot about trust and jealousy and kind of the relationship between those two things. And she uses this handkerchief and tries to kind of calm down Othello. He's really sweaty. He's clearly very anxious. She doesn't know why. She just came into this conversation. So she uses this hanky to try and cool him off, kind of calm him down, and he kind of brushes his off. And the handkerchief falls onto the ground. And through all the commotion, through all this conversation, and Othello wants to go away, and Desdemona wants to comfort him, they leave together, and the handkerchief is left on the floor. And so Emilia, who, remember, is Iago's wife, sees this handkerchief, and it's something that she knows Iago has been asking for her to get. It's a tangible item of Desdemona's that she knows Iago really wants. So rather than, calling after her friend, rather than calling after Desdemona, calling after Othello, even though she's supposed to be serving Desdemona and taking care of her, Emilia's loyalty in this instant is to her husband, regardless of how poorly he treats her. So she takes the handkerchief, brings it to him. Rather than thanking her, rather than praising her, he just continues to verbally abuse her in this interaction. But he does take the handkerchief, and he places it basically in Cassio's room to kind of frame Cassio for this. So he takes the handkerchief, just kind of puts it in Cassio's room. Cassio doesn't know whose handkerchief this is when he finds it. He just thinks it's like this random handkerchief that got dropped, and he wants to replace it. Oh, sorry, that was my dog. And so Iago plants the handkerchief and then leaves, and then he goes and finds Othello, and then they kind of resume this conversation that they were having earlier, where he's saying, listen, I think maybe I have some proof for you that Desdemona is being unfaithful. I saw Cassio with this handkerchief that I know that you gave her, and if Cassio has Desdemona's handkerchief, that can only mean that they've maybe been fooling around, something like that's been going on, she's losing interest in you, who's to say. He also goes on to say that when he used to have to share a bed with Cassio during training and they were in the same quarters, that Cassio would talk in his sleep about being with Desdemona, about having a romantic relationship with her. And so Iago brings these things forward as sort of like proof, evidence of Desdemona's unfaithfulness, and Othello gets really, really angry and starts talking really, really violently and really aggressively about wanting to kill himself or kill Desdemona. And we see like a really violent side of Othello come forward that we haven't previously seen, where he's very, very angry, very aggressive. Obviously, if you thought your wife was cheating on you, it's right to be angry, but of course it's never right to kind of be violent or to be that aggressive and that wanting of death or harm to someone else. And that's where Shakespeare also kind of makes a point about domestic violence and when things go too far and stuff like that. And we'll get into that a lot more when it comes to domestic violence and relationship abuse and stuff like that in the next couple of acts. But this is the first time we see Othello really act out of character and start to become really, really angry and really violent and aggressive toward Desdemona especially, and also somewhat toward Cassio, just in the way that he's talking about them to Iago, which really takes Iago back, because we've always known Othello to be a really calm, steady, level-headed guy. That's the reason that he's in charge of the whole army. And now we see him just kind of like losing his mind. And we find out later that like even in battle, even when he's seen his men die, even when he's seen his brother's deaths, he's never reacted this aggressively to anything. So we see that Othello has a really deep, dark jealousy issue, really deep trust issues that are kind of coming out here over this whole handkerchief thing. So he's really mad, and then he kind of agrees to give Iago Cassio's position because he feels like he can't trust Cassio anymore. Iago is the only person who's been true to him. And so obviously Iago's plan is working perfectly, where he has got Othello to trust him while breaking up his relationships with Desdemona and with Cassio. So everything's going perfectly for Iago, and obviously with this, Othello's kind of mental state and his perspective of these people in his life who are really important to him starts to really crumble. So we sort of see these two different dichotomies where Iago is kind of rising as the villain and Othello as our main hero. We're sort of starting to see his huge downfalls and some of his flaws as well. So that happens, and then we kind of move on with their day. They're having more conversations, and Othello and Desdemona are having a conversation again, and Othello says, I'm really hot, I would really like your handkerchief, will you please get it out and use it to cool me? And she says, I don't know where it is, but it's not lost, I'll find it, I trust you. And he kind of makes up this whole story about how it was a gift from his mother, and it's haunted, or cursed, and if a man gives it to a woman and then that woman is unfaithful, then that man is going to learn to hate her and all this stuff, trying basically as a fear tactic to get Desdemona to admit to being unfaithful or something like that. He's just kind of trying to get Desdemona to feel guilty is what he's doing. He's shaming her into talking. Even though Desdemona is completely in the dark about this, she has never been unfaithful to Othello. She's really confused why he's being so passive-aggressive about the handkerchief, and she's kind of realizing, this is more important than I thought it was, so yeah, I'll try to find the handkerchief, I'm really sorry. I'll figure it out. So this conversation ends where Othello has been kind of really rude to his wife, very passive-aggressive, really condescending about the handkerchief and what it means. Desdemona is like, okay, I'll find it, I'm sorry. She feels really, really bad, and she now is like making it her prerogative to find this handkerchief that she doesn't know how it went missing, and so she asks Emilia, will you help me find it? And of course, Emilia knows where it is. She's the one who gave it to Iago, and now Emilia is sort of starting to put the pieces together as to why Iago wanted the handkerchief and kind of what his plan is, and so she kind of starts planning it on her own to sort of counter that, because now her loyalty is sort of going to start shifting from loyalty to her husband to loyalty to Desdemona as actually a good person and a good friend to her. So that's kind of what's going on there. Meanwhile, Cassio is still kind of freaking out. He really wants to get back in Othello's good graces. He's thinking of all the ways he can do that. He's getting really nervous. He knows Desdemona is speaking on his behalf, but Othello is kind of brushing her off and not really giving her any attention, and not really giving Cassio kind of the results that he thought would come from befriending Desdemona. Remember, the only reason that they're friends in the first place is so that Desdemona could put in a good word for Cassio to Othello. So Cassio's kind of frustrated that that's not really working. Even getting close to Desdemona hasn't brought him the results of getting close to Othello again. So he's kind of flustered and he's struggling. And then Bianca shows up. This is the first time we meet her. And we find out that this is actually someone who he's in a relationship with. Bianca is the woman that he's been with, someone who he's been loyal to, and someone who he loves. And so this new relationship kind of brings with it a lot of twists that Iago wasn't expecting, and we'll kind of see how that unfolds a little bit later in the play. But we find out about Bianca, and Cassio asks her, I found this handkerchief in my room, I don't know whose it is, but would you please copy the embroidering for me because I really like it, but I want to give the original handkerchief back to its owner. And so Bianca agrees to that, and we find out about their relationship. And then Bianca now starts questioning Cassio's Othello to her because a handkerchief of this kind of embroidery would be more expensive, it wouldn't be an item that someone would just drop, so she's starting to wonder if maybe he's with other women. So basically right now, everyone in a relationship is really questioning and doubting their partner, and we see 3 examples of pretty unhealthy relationships. We see Othello and Desdemona, where there's this huge trust issue. They're not able to talk openly and honestly with each other. There's a lack of good communication. Othello views himself as superior to Desdemona, and he's starting to feel very violently toward her. He hasn't acted on it yet, but he's very verbally been expressing desire to hurt her because he's really doubting her loyalty, and he's being really passive-aggressive and condescending toward her about that and kind of undermining her. Then we have Iago and Emilia, where Iago just talks really poorly to Emilia. He's very verbally abusive. We'll see some physical abuse later on, but Emilia's loyalty is to her husband because that's kind of what the role of a woman would have been at this time, is just to be loyal to her husband. She's his property. Her job is to kind of do what he asks. But we see her kind of starting to desire to rebel against that, and we'll see that acted upon in the later acts of the play. So that's kind of the problematic dynamic between Iago and Emilia. And then we see Cassio and Bianca as an example of a relationship that was very trusting and was very loving, but is now kind of starting to crumble. Again, it's really similar. It kind of parallels Othello and Desdemona's relationship, but without the violence and the aggression, where Bianca is able to speak more openly to Cassio. She's saying, are you with someone else? This looks like someone from another woman. And Cassio assures her it's not. She's still questioning it, but we definitely see, a lack of that kind of violence and aggression that Othello is feeling toward Desdemona because of his thoughts that she might be being unfaithful. So Act 3 really just kind of gives us the handkerchief as a symbol of kind of trust and loyalty, and what sort of happens when that trust and loyalty starts to be lost, and how relationships can crumble, and how dependent relationships are upon that trust, and how jealousy is really a monster that can divide and lead to violence and all this kind of stuff. And that's one of the main motifs that comes up throughout the play a lot, is that idea of trust and jealousy. And we see that kind of symbolized here through the handkerchief and through the interactions between these 3 couples as this act progresses. So that's kind of Act 3 in a nutshell. If you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. Also, in case you haven't heard yet, school is for sure being finished out online. You will not be back in person this year, and there are talks about online graduation. So I want to encourage you guys so much, if you want to fight that, if you have an opinion about online graduation, and if you want your voice to be heard, you may send in comments to the school board and to the trustees in this next week. They are meeting on Monday, May 4th, to make a final decision about that. So if you want your voice to be heard, if you want to express an opinion, now is the time to speak out about that, because after May 4th, we're not going to be able to go back. So please don't just be upset internally. Use your anger and kind of fuel it as, something productive, as a way to kind of get your voice out there, so that you actually have a say in how your graduation goes down. That is it for today. I love you guys. I miss you very much. Happy Tuesday.